Hey folks, Steve here with the Fleurus 1794 Post-Mortem video. I wanted to do this to collect my thoughts on how the battle went. This being my first real, heavily engaged interaction with the system of Library of Napoleonic Battles. And despite, this scenario being a little different because it's earlier and so there's some special rules, I think I did okay, but I certainly made a few rules mistakes along the way and certainly made some bad, strategy gameplay decisions. So besides the command and movement rules issue that I had on turns 1 and 2, I had also made a couple of minor mistakes as it relates to some of the Dutch units being with the right commander, but that is easily fixed. I could swap the units and it wouldn't have made a game difference, so not a big deal. I am sure that more than once I forgot that as the coalition, they don't have divisional integrity, that they would have had to spend an extra movement point to move units back into a stack. Um, so that's kind of an issue, probably in a couple of places. All it is units may be missing out on a move, or they got an extra movement point some of the time, but I don't know. I think it's fine. It probably did give the Dutch, and at some of the times in the late game, the Austrians, a little bit too much flexibility. So they should have been paying a little bit more for movement. That might have slowed them down, and in this game, I think probably would have slowed them down enough that the French could have done something about it. So in some ways, I think the coalition benefited from me forgetting uh, to keep that in mind. Um, so that's kind of a struggle for me to just remember. I'll also say that the rules are not as clear all the time as I would really like them to be. Um, as I'm grabbing my rule book and I'm just I want to make reference to a couple of things. There are times where um, the game terms are weird. There are weird aspects um, of the rules that it. This is not to throw too much shade at OSG, but if this were a Compass game or maybe a GMT game, I feel like these little rules confusions would not be here. And it mostly has to do with the lack of certain clarifications. Now, these are clarifications for issues that I personally had. If they were there in the rule book, would help me. I'm sure that other folks have been hit with this. So um, there are examples of mechanics in the rule book, but there's no consistent example of play, like I don't know, an extended example of play would actually help a lot in ensuring that the weird little rules aspects that are hard to really make sure you understand get handled properly. If you see an example of it, then it's easy. I learn well by example. If I see it, I can take the pieces apart of why did it happen that way, and then I commit it to memory by understanding it as it works. That's how my brain works. Um, so examples of play are always great. I always like to read those, and then I read the fine print, and it all comes together really, really well. But there's weird things like that here. So there's the concept of divisional integrity, and so what I want to do is show like let's see if I can do it here. Okay. So these two units are both part of the reserve formation, which, as soon as I get the focus back, which means, okay, yeah, they activate with their leader as part of the formation of the reserves. But underneath the reserve RSV notation on the left here, you also have the DUB dub, and that stands for somebody's name, indicating a division. So the only indicator you have for divisions on here is the naming convention there, dub. So dub is a division within the reserve formation, which later in other games in the series, they're core. So this could have been like second core and then some division underneath that core. But there are rules around divisional integrity and divisional initiative that would allow you to say, like, I'm going to activate this whole stack, and they're all part of the same division. So I'm going to use the best initiative rating, and I'm going to use those guys. But if they just happen to be two units stacked together, like here, and this artillery is not necessarily part of a division, it's just part of the overall formation, it seems like, then they can stack together. You can have two combat units in a stack. That's fine. If you have a leader, you can potentially stack more. But if you were to activate them for movement, and I keep using the word activate, even the rules don't use the word activate, but that's really what you're doing. If they are going to move and pass their initiative checks or whatever, if they're not part of the same division, they need to move separately. Now, the rules don't say exactly that. They tell you how the game is supposed to work, but they don't really flesh out the consequences of the rules being the way that they are. So I got that wrong several times, many times, in fact, whether or not they were part of the same division, um, I was rolling for the stack, and the rules just really don't help make that clear, in my opinion, and that's kind of a bummer. Even just reading the rules the first time through, I'm like, oh, this game's not hard, but once you actually start getting the units on the board, you have to pay attention to a lot more things that feel like they should be more intuitive than they actually are. Um, yeah. The player may choose to roll for each integrated division using the best initiative in the division as the whole stack's initiative. And when you look at divisional integrity, 322, it is all units belonging to the same division may stack 3 to the hex without a leader present. So there's just something there where um, you have to watch out. And by and large, this is not. It's the weirdness of things where, like, it says you can move as a stack in the movement rules. So if that's a stack and both have activated, then yes, you can move as a stack and move them. Okay, great. Unless they're not in command, in which case, if they're all the same division, then you can roll initiative as a division and move the stack. If not, each unit will roll independently and have to move independently, is what it sounds like. So there's a little bit of nuance there, and I feel like it would, and I hope I'm right in explaining it this way. It could be very well I'm explaining this to you right now, and I could be wrong, um, and someone needs to correct me. Geez, uh, but I think that's the way it's supposed to work. But an example or something that really fleshes out how command and movement affect each other, and an extended example of play would help with that. And an extended example of play that is intentionally written to show as many weird circumstances as is possible would be greatly beneficial in understanding these little tiny nuances. Now, again, I picked a weird battle, and so maybe I'm just asking for it here, and I'm introducing my own challenges by playing a battle that has a really weird organizational structure. Um, but I have for sure stacked up units that probably should not have been a divisional stack, and should have been moving some units more independently. Uh, and to me, that's the real distinct difference or trouble I'm having is, how do you move a stack of units that are not necessarily part of the same division, but the same formation? How do you move them differently, if they are the same division? I think I have it, but I'm sure as I played the game, I didn't do it perfect to that. And probably, and I probably did this for both sides, got a little extra movement points out of it because I wasn't paying as much. Because at some point, maybe some units should not have moved as a stack. They maybe should have moved independently, and then somebody's getting slowed down by not being able to pay the extra movement point to join a stack. That's probably the biggest impact there. I don't know that it was huge. I don't know that it happened very much, but I can't act like it didn't happen somewhere along the way. It probably did. It probably did. What else? In terms of the strategy, I do wonder, should I have, as the Frenchman, trying to destroy, burn the bridge here? And it didn't really occur to me when was a good time to do that. The march orders not used. Maybe I should have used a march order for the left wing and gotten them in a better, safer spot. Hard to tell. There's definitely certain mechanics I didn't make use of. I just didn't take that tool out of the toolbox. Destroying bridges being one. Might have really saved the French here if they pulled behind the river and just destroyed the bridge. Could have been a big help. Might have kept the Dutch from being able to get across this river. So a mistake on my part of just not realizing, hey, maybe now is a really good time to do this thing. Because we knew we were probably not going to push them back out. If we had used a march order over here, we might have been able to get a stronger line right here and maybe had pulled back the reserve formation earlier than we would have been maybe in a better defensive posture. I think as the French, the fact that we didn't fall back sooner is probably its own mistake. But I do find that once you're in these woods, things get awfully hard to operate because you can only move a couple hexes at most if you don't have the trails. And really, with forests or woods rather, costing cavalry 4 movement points and most cavalry only having 6 or 7, obviously, like you're moving 1 hex per movement. So your cavalry is basically useless. And I could have found a better way to use them as well, but they still could be screens. We would eventually run out of forest if we kept retreating. So trying to figure out like where really is actually the best place to hold up and form a defensive line. It is tricky. Obviously, there's a nice spot here where we're anchored on the river. Over here, there's a chateau, there's an improved position, and then, you have some forest, then you have a town, and then there's a chateau here. So there is kind of, you can kind of picture a line out there that kind of makes sense to run back to. And if I had done that sooner as France, I might have been in a better position. But what's really weird to think about is when I read the design notes for the scenario, it says like, oh, the French had more men, but gosh, the entire time we were fighting this battle, it never really felt that way. It felt like we're outnumbered. I'd have to go look at all the strength points and try to make some kind of calculation here, but it definitely felt like the French had to fall back. which they did historically. They ultimately won the battle when the Austrians decided to leave, or the coalition decided to leave, um, which we didn't have to do, and we just decided to push, and we suffered casualties for it, but we ended up dealing a much greater number of casualties to the French, um, which is interesting because if you play the mini campaign, and I am thinking about playing the mini campaign while I've got this specific battle set out. Um, there's a whole thing where, like, as on the day of this battle, if the French still hold Charleroi, then the coalition is going to withdraw, and they're going to withdraw north up to what is it, Montchezon. I'm sure I'm butchering that at the time of day I'm trying to record this. Um, but heading very, much farther north, retiring north, and then the battle continues into the next couple of days into, like, okay, are we doing a battle of St. John or not? Um, so I kind of like that idea because it begins with a coalition garrison in Charleroi that you're basically doing a mini siege to get them to surrender and then get in a position for the day of battle. So combining, the approach to battle with kind of a stand-in for the rearguard action at the Battle of St. John, which is its own distinct scenario in this package, as a, like, what if the Austrians decided to stay and fight. So it's more hypothetical than really what happened, depending on how you play it, I guess. But the mini campaign sounds interesting to me to try, because it's going to put us back on this map and it's going to give us a chance to maybe navigate things a bit differently and try to understand, like, hey, how do we want to work this much in a longer scheme, because we're basically playing to the end of the day, but even by the end of the day the French position was untenable, and having another swing at doing it right or doing a better job of doing it right, it does interest me. So yeah, I don't know. It was kind of a weird experience, guys. I had a weird experience because the rules issues that I got caught up on, were throwing me for a loop a little bit, and it's finally starting to gel together better. Um, and I certainly want to give this whole package another shot with the mini campaign. It is fun, so, like, don't get me wrong. I just, trying to figure out the best way to make use of all the mechanics in an actual battle, was tricky. Now, if I was playing somebody opposed, I'm sure they, and maybe I would opt to play without Fog of War and just say, hey, let's just talk through this so I make sure I cement the rules in my head. Um, I think that might be useful at some point, if I don't feel like I really get the system by the next, scenario playthrough. I didn't really do cavalry charges. Those seem like you almost never want to do them because they're so dangerous. And I don't even know in other battles how much you want to do cavalry charges. At best, if you got a lot of cavalry together and you can do what is effectively a 1-to-1, there's a 50% chance of overrunning the unit so that you can very likely eliminate them. If they get eliminated, they're just usually just going to be going to the units awaiting recovery box. So I don't know how much I like the idea of, like, risking steps or my entire cavalry unit to be permanently eliminated in some cases to possibly send a unit to the units awaiting recovery box. So cavalry charge is not something I see myself making very much use of. We also didn't get very many bombardment shots with our artillery, but that's mostly due to the terrain. So there tended to be, a lot of the time, ridges that disrupted line of sight. There are ways that crests, there are ways that crests don't inhibit line of sight if your artillery is, like, on top of a hex side of a crest, um, shooting downward at somebody or shooting across to somebody. But much of the time, I was maneuvering units to stay behind other crests, so terrain was a pretty big factor in, like, where I was putting units because I didn't want to get that artillery fire. artillery fire can be like terribly deadly because you can knock whole steps off of units. You definitely can do it. It's unlikely until you can build up more artillery units to get higher bombardment strength, but you can just lose steps. And I could see, operationally speaking, like in the grand scheme of things, you get a good bombardment shot off with artillery, you cause a step loss to a unit, then you do a cavalry charge and attack, and like that's your best shot at knocking out a unit. And when you do that, that unit will be permanently eliminated because when it was eliminated, it was already reduced. So besides just the combined arms bonus for combat, if you can actually do the utility cases of artillery and cavalry, I could see where you can make it much easier to eliminate a whole unit of the enemy, and that'll be super useful. But there's still risk involved there. So, yeah, artillery ended up being mostly used for combats, which was fine, but they didn't seem as fun because they're functionally just adding one or two combat points to the combat, and that's kind of all they're really doing at that point. Even reaction fire, because of the terrain, did not get used a huge amount, a little bit, and it was such the combat strengths of the artillery was such that you really couldn't target a hex that had artillery in it because the strength comparisons would kind of nullify each other. You'd be rolling on the less than one column on the bombardment chart and basically not really able to get any result that would matter. And even retreating may not even be what you really want to have happen. Because if you force a unit to retreat, it could mean they're going to get pushed farther back than you can reach with your units for your own combat, kind of thing. The there's a there's something to this combat system, and I know uh, this is what you want to do. I mean, there's no doubt about it. This is at a operational level the thing you want to do. Getting that concentric attack where you're enveloping the enemy flank or unit or whatever in Zox and can eliminate them is super key, and it's super key for this battle. I think in particular, probably maybe as much if not more than other battles in the system because there's fewer units to begin with. So knowing that like a friendly unit will not save you, if you get into that case where and it doesn't take much, right? You just get here's a guy, boom boom, here's a guy. This stack is as good as dead now, because even if you can get 1-to-1 odds, that gives you a decent chance of a retreat, and maybe you get in a shock, but shock could still give you a retreat. These guys are off the board, and if it's their first time off the board, there's that chance that they can come back with recovery and reorganization, but they're out of the picture for a little while, and depending on their initiative scores, it could be a while before they come back. And then, if you've just eliminated a unit like that, well, the next unit that's going to be targeted to get removed is probably not too far by, and if you've managed to eliminate one unit, that flank is in danger. You're going to be able to move, roll up their line, go to the next unit, lay down the Zox, eliminate that guy, eliminate that guy, eliminate that guy. If you can make it work, usually the opponent will have some ability to maybe respond and maybe do a reversal on you because maybe your line's kind of in a weird state because you've jumped out ahead. That all actually kind of seems fine with like the combat model of Napoleonic warfare, where if you can get into a good flank enfilade situation, that's going to be heavily disruptive. The system supports that. That ended up being really critical, where if you can hit the right stack of units with that, if you can catch somebody in a bad position, and they were put there probably because of retreats or whatever, like they tried to retreat and then they got pushed back, that broke up the line, they're kind of hanging out there to dry, that's where you kind of swarm them and eliminate them. So that's definitely the key. And then the other big aspect that I found is that because of the terrain of this map, where there's lots of towns, woods, the chateaus, but that's an obvious one. We ended up getting well, in the crests too. We ended up getting a lot of shock results, like a lot of shock results. So this idea that like, oh, this system isn't bloody, like, I don't know, maybe it depends on what map you're playing on, but we got into shock combat quite a bit, and that ended up hurting a lot of units a lot. Like it happened a lot. And I mean, gosh, we have 11 permanently eliminated units for the French in this battle. Some of that, I mean, at some point I should have said, all right, the French are cutting and running, they're giving up, and they're trying to get the heck out of Dodge, or something like that. But we fought tooth and nail, and it did just get to the point where either shock was burning through steps and eliminating units, and you can hold up in a chateau, but if the attacking enemy has more steps than you, that might be a losing proposition, because they can just outshock you eventually with sheer numbers. That's attritional when you're in those terrain locations where that fight will end up being very attritional. And then when you're out and about in more open field terrain, then it's more about maneuver and trying to get it to where you're going to knock the enemy back several hexes, put them in a bad spot where they're not going to be able to get back in line or get safe with their buddies, and you're going to defeat them in detail by crushing the flank. All that stuff seems to work okay. I just need to get better at understanding how to make it happen. And I think I did pretty good. And you're stuck in that age-old war game thing of, do I pile a bunch of units in a single hex to stack and have a really potent force that is maybe harder to make retreat in the first place, or do I spread out to kind of cover flanks, but knowing that one of those flanks individually is going to be weaker and could still get defeated. The use of cavalry to have high movement, to snake out around a flank, is super powerful and is super useful. So that thing the French needed to do to really like anchor themselves, right here, would have helped keep the Austrian cavalry from having too much of a field day, kind of sneaking out behind them, which ended up being a factor. So as I'm finishing this up, right, I guess the key message is I could have done much better understanding the rules if, but on the other hand, the rules could be clearer in what they're trying to communicate, and an extended example of play can certainly help with that, and really should help with that. Um, and so if that's something OSG can publish as a document online, I think that would greatly help them make this more accessible for people, and not have as many rules issues that seem to be cropping up for some folks. I'm not the only one who's had some rules questions around some of this stuff. I can certainly do better playing the actual game, like just playing the game well. That's on me. I think this was a good run to kind of see how everything comes together. I'm sure somebody could suggest another battle from one of the main games not be an expansion to an expansion as the first battle to try in this system, and that's probably very valid, and I need to keep that in mind if I'm sounding harsh at times, because this is kind of a weird battle, and it is using special rules to reflect an earlier time period than just the Napoleonic period. This is not the Battle of Waterloo by any means, despite the geographical proximity. So yeah, a learning battle, we'll call it. Had fun, had some struggles, lessons learned for sure, and I'll take that into the next thing I'm going to do. I think what I'll probably end up doing is trying to set up the mini campaign and see how it feels to have something that runs a little slower at first, um, and is going to be before the big clashes that eventually occur, and should give us a little bit more space to work with in the overall system. I'm probably going to, if I do that, I'm probably going to do it in a very abbreviated format, meaning I may only show what it may end up being is like a single video, even. And that single video, what I think I've decided is I want to show snips of the action during the recovery turn. So basically, every 3 to 4 turns, we'll do a check-in rather than every player turn. That would get very long-winded, and every turn, because even that will get long-winded, and we'd be here forever. So watch for that. That's sort of the next thing to come. I hope this video was of some interest to you. If you're already a veteran of the series, anything you can do to help point out some things to keep in mind, please do that. If what I'm saying makes sense and you can confirm my thoughts, then do that too. If you've got other input about this specific battle because you played it before, let me know. I think we played through what is a reasonable end state for the battle, and I'm sure others will have many other variations, including the more historical result. The mini campaign again will probably give us something resembling the historical state, because there's a special rule that says if the Austrians don't take Charleroi by the end of June 26th, they actually need to retreat. So if the French had held out a little bit longer, then they would have maybe had forced the Austrians to retreat here. But not, retreat in quotes, because they've just mangled the French army. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you in the next one. Take care. Keep gaming.